The wind off the harbour tasted of salt and endings. Arya Stark stood at the edge of White Harbour's longest dock, watching sailors load barrels onto a ship that would carry her beyond the edge of the world. The wood beneath her boots was worn smooth by 1,000 departures, and she wondered how many of those who had sailed from this spot had ever returned. The thought did not frighten her. It should have, perhaps, but fear had become a stranger to her somewhere between Braavos and the twins, between the House of Black and White and the throne room where she had watched a tyrant queen burn. The ship was smaller than she had imagined. Not a great war galley or a trading cog fat with cargo, but something in between. A vessel built for distance rather than glory. Its hull was dark wood, weathered but sound, and its sails were the colour of smoke. A Braavosi shipwright had designed it, or so the captain claimed, with a keel deep enough to handle ocean swells and a mast sturdy enough to survive storms that could tear lesser ships apart. The crew was already aboard, 20 men and 3 women from places as scattered as the stars. Northmen who knew ice and survival, Braavosi sailors who understood wind and current, and one navigator from the Summer Islands whose people had sailed further west than anyone in Westeros had ever dared, though even they had always turned back. Sansa stood beside her, wrapped in furs despite the autumn warmth. Her sister had insisted on coming to see her off, though the journey from Winterfell to White Harbour was not an easy one for a queen. The Queen in the North, they called her now. Arya had heard the title so many times it had lost its strangeness. But standing here, watching Sansa's face, she could still see the girl who had dreamed of southern nights and lemon cakes. That girl was gone, worn away by everything that had come after. What remained was harder, stronger, but there was a weariness in her eyes that no amount of sleep could cure. "You do not have to do this," Sansa said quietly. Her voice carried no judgment, only a sadness that settled between them like fog. "There is a place for you here. There will always be a place for you at Winterfell." Arya nodded. She knew this was true. Sansa had said it before, many times, in many ways. The North needed Starks. The Pack survives. All the old words, the old truths. But needing and belonging were not the same thing, and Arya had learned the difference in the hardest way possible. She had killed for her family. She had crossed the narrow sea and lost herself and found herself again, or thought she had. She had baked men into pies and slit throats in the dark and watched kings and queens rise and fall like waves against a shore. And when it was over, when the wars were done and the dead were burned and the realm had stumbled toward something almost like peace, she had stood in Winterfell's great hall and felt more alone than she ever had in Braavos. "I know," Arya said, "but I do not belong here any more. I do not think I ever did. Not really. Not the way you do." Sansa's mouth tightened, but she did not argue. She had learned not to. That was one of the things that had changed between them. Once, Sansa would have pressed, would have tried to convince her with words and tears and appeals to duty. But the war had taught them both that some decisions could not be unmade, and some roads could not be walked together. They were sisters. They were Pack. But they were not the same. "What will you do out there?" Sansa asked. "What are you looking for?" Arya turned to look at the ship, at the crew moving across its deck with the easy confidence of men and women who had made their peace with uncertainty. What was she looking for? She had asked herself that question 100 times since the idea had first taken root. At first, she had thought it was about escape. Running from the ghosts that crowded Winterfell's halls, from the memories of everyone they had lost. Father, mother, Robb, Rickon. Even Jon, in his way, was lost to her now. He had gone north of the wall with the free folk, choosing exile over a crown he had never wanted. She understood that choice better than most. But escape was only part of it. There was something else, something deeper. A hunger that had nothing to do with revenge or survival. "I want to know what is out there," she said finally. "West of Westeros, beyond the maps. My whole life I have been told that the world ends at the sunset sea, that there is nothing beyond it, but water and storms and death. But no one actually knows that. No one has gone far enough to find out. I want to find out." "And if there is nothing?" Sansa asked. "If the Maesters are right and there is only ocean until you reach the other side of the world, what then?" Arya smiled, though there was little joy in it. "Then I will have seen more ocean than anyone else in Westeros. That will have to be enough." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the gulls wheel and cry above the harbour. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist that clung to the water. Soon it would be time to board, time to leave. Arya felt the weight of it pressing down on her, not regret exactly, but something close to it. A recognition that once she stepped onto that ship, once the shore disappeared behind her, she would be choosing something irrevocable. She would be choosing to let go. "I brought you something," Sansa said. She reached into her cloak and drew out a bundle, wrapped in oiled cloth. "I know you have needle. I know you do not need anything else, but I wanted you to have this." Arya unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a cloak. Thick wool dyed the grey of winter clouds, with a white wolf embroidered on the clasp. Stark colours, stark symbols. She ran her fingers over the stitching, feeling the care that had gone into every thread. Sansa had made this herself, or had it made. It would have taken weeks. "So you do not forget who you are," Sansa said softly. "No matter how far you sail, you are Arya Stark of Winterfell. You are my sister. You are a wolf. And wolves always find their way home." The words hit harder than Arya had expected. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat and pulled Sansa into an embrace. Her sister was taller now, or perhaps Arya had simply stopped growing. Either way, they fit together differently than they had as children. But the warmth was the same. The connection was the same. "Pack. I will not forget," Arya whispered. "I promise." They held each other for a long moment, and then Sansa pulled back, blinking hard. She was trying not to cry, Arya realized, trying to be strong. The Queen in the North could not weep on a dock in front of sailors and strangers. But her eyes were bright, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her skirts. "Go," Sansa said, "before I change my mind and have you dragged back to Winterfell in chains." Arya laughed, a real laugh this time, and slung the cloak over her shoulders. It settled around her like an old memory, heavy and warm and familiar. She fastened the clasp and then picked up the small pack that held everything she owned. It was not much. Needle, a few changes of clothes, a water skin, the coin she had saved. She travelled light these days. She had learned that in Bravos. The less you carried, the faster you could move, and speed had saved her life more times than she could count. She walked toward the gangplank, and the crew turned to watch her approach. They knew who she was, or thought they did. The wolf girl, The assassin who had killed the Night King and the Freys, and half the names on the lists, whispered in taverns from King's Landing to the Wall. Some of it was true, some of it was legend grown wild in the telling. She did not bother to correct them. Let them think what they wanted. Out here, beyond the edge of the maps, none of it would matter anyway. The captain met her at the rail. His name was Davith, a Braavosi with a scar across his throat and eyes the colour of slate. He had sailed the narrow sea for 30 years and claimed he had seen things that would make a Meister weep. Arya believed him. Men like Davith did not lie about the sea. They might exaggerate, might embroider the truth with flourishes, but the sea itself was too dangerous to mock with falsehoods. "Lady Stark," he said, inclining his head, "we are ready when you are." "I am not a lady," Arya said, "just Arya." Davith's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "As you say, just Arya. Welcome aboard." She stepped onto the deck and felt the ship shift beneath her, adjusting to her weight. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it reminded her that she was no longer on solid ground. Everything from this moment forward would be in motion. The sea did not care about Stark or Lannister, north or south, living or dead. It simply was, vast and indifferent, and endlessly deep. The crew cast off the mooring lines, and the ship began to drift away from the dock. Arya turned to look back at Sansa, who stood alone now, a figure in fur and wool against the grey stone of the harbour. Her sister raised one hand in farewell, and Arya raised hers in return. They stayed like that, watching each other, until the distance grew too great and Sansa became just another shape on the shore, and then nothing at all. The sails snapped open, catching the wind, and the ship surged forward. White Harbour fell away behind them, its towers and walls shrinking until they were no larger than toys. The other ships in the harbour turned into dots, and then those dots vanished too. Soon there was nothing but water in every direction, grey and restless beneath a sky that promised storms before nightfall. Arya found a spot near the bow and sat down, pulling the cloak tighter around her shoulders. The wind was colder out here, away from the land, and it carried a taste she did not recognize. Not salt, exactly. Something older. Something that had never known walls or hearths or human voices. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, this wind from the edge of the world, and tried to imagine what lay ahead. She thought of all the places she had been. Winterfell, King's Landing, Harrenhal, the Riverlands, Braavos. Each one had shaped her in ways she was still discovering. Each one had taken something and given something in return. But they had all been marked on maps, named and known and measured. What would it be like to step onto land that had no name, to meet people who had never heard of Westeros or the Iron Throne or the wars that had torn the Seven Kingdoms apart? For the first time in years, she did not know what came next. There was no list, no target, no mission, just the open sea and whatever lay beyond it. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar and fragile uncurling in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. Hope. She opened her eyes and looked out at the horizon, where the water met the sky in a line so perfect it seemed drawn by a god. Somewhere beyond that line was the unknown. Somewhere beyond that line was the answer to a question she had been carrying since she was a girl, watching her father sharpen ice in the Godswood. Who was Arya Stark? Not the girl her father had wanted her to be. Not the faceless assassin the kindly man had tried to create. Not the wolf the North needed, or the sister Sansa hoped would stay. Someone else. Someone new. She did not have the answer yet, but she would find it. Out there, in the blank spaces on the map, in the places where no one knew her name or her history or the weight she carried, she would find it, or she would die trying. And either way, it would be her choice, her path, her story. The ship sailed west, and Arya Stark sailed with it, leaving behind everything she had ever known, chasing a horizon that retreated with every mile. Behind her, Westeros grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the curve of the world. Ahead, there was only water and wind and the promise of something no one had ever seen. She smiled into the spray and did not look back. The sea had no mercy and no memory. Arya learned this truth during the first week beyond sight of land, when the coastline of Westeros vanished behind them like a dream upon waking. The water stretched in every direction, grey and green and sometimes black when clouds covered the sun. It moved constantly, rising and falling in swells that made the ship creak and groan like a living thing in pain. At night, when the stars came out, they seemed brighter than they had ever been on land, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the tiny vessel cutting through the darkness below them. She spent the first days learning the rhythms of shipboard life. There was less space than she had imagined, less privacy, less of everything except water and sky. The crew moved around each other with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their place and their task. Davith commanded from the stern, his scarred hands steady on the tiller. The Braavosi sailors managed the rigging with the casual grace of men who had been born to the sea. The Northmen, fewer in number but no less vital, handled the heavy work of hauling rope and securing cargo. And the navigator from the Summer Islands, a woman named Koya, with skin dark as polished wood and eyes that seemed to hold secrets, spent her hours studying the stars and the currents with an intensity that reminded Arya of the maesters in their towers. Arya tried to make herself useful. She was strong from years of training, quick with her hands, and unafraid of hard work. But the sea required different skills than the ones she had learned in Braavos or the North. Balance was essential on a deck that never stopped moving. Timing mattered when pulling rope or adjusting sail. And there was a language to the work, commands and responses that the crew used without thinking, that Arya had to learn word by word, like a child learning to speak. Some of the crew welcomed her efforts, others watched her with suspicion or resentment, though they were careful not to say anything where Davith could hear. She was paying for this voyage, after all. Her gold had bought the ship's provisions and the crew's wages for 6 months, with promises of more if they found anything worth finding. But gold could not buy respect or trust, and Arya knew better than to expect either without earning them first. The first sign that something was changing came on the 9th day. Koya stood at the bow for an hour after dawn, staring at the water with a frown that deepened the lines around her mouth. Finally, she made her way back to where Davith stood and spoke to him in a low voice. Arya was close enough to hear fragments of the conversation, words like current and drift and wrong direction. Davith's expression did not change, but his knuckles tightened on the tiller. He called for adjustments to the sail, subtle shifts that most of the crew probably did not even notice. But Arya noticed. She had learned to watch for the small things, the tiny changes in expression or posture that revealed what people were really thinking. And what she saw in Davith's face was concern. That night, she approached Koja near the stern, where the navigator sat with her charts spread across her lap. The maps were beautiful, drawn on something that looked like stretched hide, marked with lines and symbols that meant nothing to Arya. Koja looked up as she approached, her dark eyes measuring. "You want to know what is wrong?" Koja said. It was not a question. "Yes," Arya said. "I heard you talking to Davith. You said the current was wrong." Koja was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing one of the lines on her chart. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent that turned some words soft, and others sharp, musical, and strange. "The ocean has rivers, just like the land, currents that flow in patterns old as the world. We follow these currents west because they are reliable. They carry ships where they need to go. But for the last 2 days, the current has been shifting. Not much. Not enough that most would notice. But enough." "Enough for what?" Arya asked. "Enough to know we are leaving the known world behind," Koja said simply. "My people have sailed west before. Not as far as we are going, but far enough to map the currents and the winds. Far enough to know what is reliable. But now we are beyond even that knowledge. The water beneath us has never carried a Summer Islander ship. Perhaps it has never carried any ship at all." Arya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Is that dangerous?" Koja's smile was thin. "Everything about this voyage is dangerous, girl. You knew that when you paid for it. But yes, this is more dangerous than I expected it to be so soon. We are 3 weeks from any known port. If the currents fail us, if the winds turn against us, we will have to find our own way, and that way might lead us nowhere good." "But you can navigate by the stars," Arya said. "You do not need currents for that." "The stars help," Koja agreed. "But stars tell you where you are, not where the water wants to take you. And the ocean is stronger than any ship, stronger than any crew. If it decides to pull us somewhere, we go, whether we want to or not." Arya thought about that as she returned to her small space below deck, a corner near the cargo hold where she had strung up a hammock. The ship rocked beneath her, and she could hear the timbers groaning, the water slapping against the hull. Somewhere above, someone was singing. A Braavosi sailing song about a girl who loved the sea more than any man. The melody was mournful and beautiful, and it made Arya think of all the people who had sailed into the unknown and never returned. The storms started 3 days later. They came without warning, rolling in from the west like a wall of iron and fury. The sky turned black in the space of an hour, and the wind rose from a whisper to a scream. Davith ordered all hands on deck, and the crew scrambled to reef the sails and secure anything that could be torn away. Arya worked alongside them, her hands raw and bleeding from hauling rope, her clothes soaked through in minutes. The rain came next, not falling, but driving sideways, each drop hitting like a thrown stone. The waves grew until they towered over the ship, mountains of water that lifted the vessel up and then dropped it into valleys so deep that Arya could not see the sky. She clung to whatever she could find and tried not to think about how small they were, how fragile, how easily the sea could swallow them all and leave no trace. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day. By the time it finally broke, 2 men had been washed overboard, despite being tied to the mast, and the ship's mainmast had cracked near the base. they were alive, but only just, and the damage would slow them until repairs could be made. Davith gathered the crew on deck once the sea had calmed enough to stand without holding on. His face was grey with exhaustion, his eyes red from salt and sleeplessness. "We have a choice," he said, his voice hoarse. "We can turn back, make for the nearest port we know, and count ourselves lucky to be alive. Or we can continue west. But if we continue, we do so knowing that storms like that may come again, knowing that the currents are strange and the winds unreliable, knowing that we are sailing into water no one has mapped and may not survive to map ourselves." The crew was silent. Some of them looked at each other, faces tight with fear or doubt. Others stared at the deck, at their hands, at anything but Davith or each other. Arya felt the weight of their eyes on her eventually. She was the one who had paid for this voyage. She was the reason they were here at all. "I am not turning back," she said quietly. "But I will not force anyone to come with me. If you want to leave, I will pay you for the time you have given and find another ship to take you home." One of the Northmen, a grizzled sailor named Torrin with a beard like iron wire, spat over the rail. "We signed on for the whole voyage, girl. We do not run from a little weather." "That was not a little weather," another man said. His name was Mal, younger than Torrin, with nervous hands that would not stay still. "That was the ocean trying to kill us, and it nearly succeeded." "The ocean always tries to kill you," Koja said. Her voice cut through the murmuring like a knife. "That is what the ocean does. You do not sail because it is safe. You sail because there is something worth finding. If you thought this would be easy, you are a fool, and fools do not belong on my ship." "It is not your ship," Mal shot back. "It is Davith's ship, and Davith has more sense than to sail us all to our deaths for some girl's mad dream." Davith raised a hand, and the argument died. "It is not my ship either," he said. "I am the captain, but I serve those who pay my wage. And right now, that is Arya Stark. She says we continue, so we continue. But Mal is right about one thing. This is dangerous. More dangerous than I thought it would be when we left White Harbor. So I will ask again. Is there anyone who wants to turn back?" 3 men raised their hands. Mal was one of them. The other 2 were Braavosi sailors, brothers by the look of them, with the same sharp features and dark hair. Davith nodded slowly. "When we sight land, any land, you 3 will be put ashore with your wages and enough supplies to find your way to a port. Until then, you work like everyone else. Agreed?" The 3 men nodded, and the tension that had been building on the deck eased slightly. Not much, but enough. Arya felt a pang of guilt. These men were risking their lives because she had asked them to, and now some of them wanted to leave because the risk was greater than they had imagined. She could not blame them for that. She had asked for volunteers, not heroes. But she could not turn back either. Not now. Not when they were finally beyond the edge of the maps, beyond the safe and the known and the measured. This was what she had come for. This uncertainty, this fear, this feeling of standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. The repairs took 4 days. The crew worked dawn to dusk, and Arya worked with them, learning how to splice rope and patch canvas and seal cracks in wood with tar that stuck to everything it touched. She listened to their conversations, the complaints and the jokes and the stories they told to pass the time. Some of them were starting to warm to her, she thought, or at least starting to see her as something other than a rich girl playing at adventure. During those 4 days, they drifted with the current, moving slowly west, even though the sails were down. Koja took measurements every few hours, frowning at her instruments and making notes in a language Arya did not recognize. On the 3rd day, one of the sailors spotted something floating in the water and called out. Davith ordered the ship closer, and they pulled it aboard with hooks and rope. It was debris, pieces of a ship, or what had once been a ship. The wood was strange, darker than oak, harder than anything Arya had seen before, and it was carved with symbols, not letters exactly, but something like them, shapes that might have been writing or decoration or something else entirely. No one recognized them. Not Davith, not Koja, not even the oldest of the Northmen who claimed to have sailed from Eastwatch to Ashai in his youth. "Where did this come from?" Arya asked, running her fingers over the carvings. The wood was smooth, despite its time in the water, worn but not rotted. "Somewhere west of here," Koja said. "Somewhere we have not been yet. These symbols are old, older than anything I have seen. And look at the wood itself. This is not from any tree that grows in Westeros or Essos or the Summer Islands. This is something else." They stored the debris in the hold, and the crew talked about it for hours afterward. Some thought it was a good sign, proof that there was land ahead, civilization, people who built ships and sailed and carved symbols into their hulls. Others thought it was a warning. A ship had broken apart out here, after all. Whoever had built it had not survived to tell the tale. Arya did not know what to think. She lay in her hammock that night, listening to the ship creak and the water whisper against the hull, and thought about the unknown sailors who had carved those symbols. Had they been explorers like her? Had they sailed west, looking for something, and found only storms and death? Or had they lived somewhere beyond the horizon, in lands no one in Westeros had ever imagined? She reached up and touched the wolf clasp on her cloak, still pinned above her hammock where she could see it. Sansa's gift, a reminder of home and family and everything she had left behind. She wondered what her sister would think of this. The storms, the fear, the strange debris from a ship that should not exist. Sansa would tell her to turn back, probably, to be sensible, to remember that Starks belonged in the north, not on the open sea chasing mysteries that might kill them. But Arya was not Sansa. She never had been, and she was not turning back. On the 5th day, they raised the repaired sail and caught the wind. The ship surged forward, cutting through the water with renewed speed. The crew seemed lighter somehow, as if surviving the storm and making the repairs had proven something to themselves. Even Mal and the 2 brothers who wanted to leave did their work without complaint. Arya stood at the bow and watched the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reflected off the water like molten metal. It was beautiful, terrible and beautiful, and utterly indifferent to the tiny ship sailing beneath it. Somewhere ahead was land. She could feel it, a certainty that had no basis in logic or evidence. Land and people, and answers to questions she had not even thought to ask yet. All she had to do was keep moving forward, keep sailing west, keep chasing the horizon that retreated with every mile. She smiled into the wind and felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, not anymore. Something harder, something that tasted like salt and smelled like storm. Determination. She would find what lay beyond the edge of the maps, or she would die trying, and either way she would do it on her own terms. The ship sailed on, and the known world faded further and further behind them, until it was nothing but a memory carried on the wind. Land came as a whisper at first, a rumour carried on the wind. The gulls appeared 3 days before the islands, circling the ship with cries that sounded almost like laughter. They were larger than the gulls of White Harbour, with feathers marked in patterns of grey and white and something close to blue. Koja watched them with narrowed eyes and told Davith they were within a day's sail of shore. The crew's mood shifted immediately, tension giving way to anticipation. Even Mal and the brothers, who wanted to leave, seemed eager, leaning over the rails and scanning the horizon for the first glimpse of solid ground. The islands revealed themselves slowly, emerging from the morning mist like ghosts taking form. They were not green and welcoming like the lands Arya knew. They were black. Volcanic rock twisted into shapes that seemed wrong somehow. Too sharp, too angular, as if the earth itself had been broken and never properly healed. Steam rose from cracks in the stone, and the air carried the smell of sulphur and salt and something else, something Arya could not name, but that made her hand drift toward Needle without thinking. There were 7 islands in the chain, though calling them islands seemed generous. They were more like the shattered remains of something that had once been whole, scattered across the water in a rough circle. The largest was perhaps 3 miles across, a jagged mountain of black stone rising from the sea with smoke seeping from vents near its peak. The smallest were little more than rocks, barely large enough for a man to stand on. And between them, the water churned and frothed, moving in patterns that made no sense, as if currents were fighting each other beneath the surface. Davith guided the ship carefully between 2 of the larger islands, searching for a place to anchor. The crew was silent now, all eyes on the shore. There were structures there, Arya realized, ruins, towers of dark stone that looked as if they had been melted rather than built, their surfaces smooth and glassy in places, rough and pitted in others. Some had collapsed entirely, leaving only foundations and scattered debris. Others still stood, defiant and empty, their windows like dead eyes staring out at the sea. "This place is old," Koja said quietly. She stood beside Arya at the bow, her dark hands gripping the rail. "Older than Valyria, older than the first men. Look at the stone. Look at how the wind has worn it. Thousands of years at least, maybe more." "Who built it?" Arya asked. "I do not know," Koja said. "But whoever they were, they are gone now." They found a bay on the eastern side of the largest island, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a natural breakwater of twisted rock. The water was deeper than Davith liked, but there was nowhere else to anchor without risking the ship on hidden reefs. They dropped anchor and lowered a boat, and Arya climbed down with Davith, Koja, Torren, and 3 other sailors. The rest of the crew stayed aboard, weapons ready, watching the shore with the wariness of men who knew that empty places were often the most dangerous. The boat scraped against black sand, and Arya stepped onto land for the first time in weeks. The ground felt wrong beneath her feet, too solid after so long at sea, and she stumbled before catching herself. The others seemed to have the same problem, all of them moving carefully, relearning how to walk on something that did not shift and sway. The beach was narrow, rising quickly to a slope of loose volcanic rock that crunched beneath their boots. Arya could see the ruins more clearly now. They were not built in any style she recognized, no straight walls or clean corners. Everything curved and flowed, as if the stone had been shaped while it was still soft. And the symbols were everywhere, carved into every surface, the same strange shapes they had seen on the debris they had pulled from the sea. Not quite writing, not quite art, but something in between. "Stay together," Davith said, his hand on the knife at his belt. "We do not know what is here. We do not know if anyone is watching, and we do not touch anything we do not understand." They moved up the slope in a tight group, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No people, no animals, no sound, except the wind and the distant hiss of steam from the vents higher up the mountain. The silence was oppressive, heavy with the weight of all those empty years. The first building they entered had no door, just an opening shaped like a teardrop, wide at the bottom and narrowing to a point at the top. Inside, the floor was smooth, black stone, unbroken and seamless, as if it had been poured rather than laid. The walls were covered in murals, faded but still visible. Arya moved closer, studying them in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. The images showed people, or something like people. They were tall and thin, with features that seemed almost human, but not quite right. Their eyes were too large, their limbs too long. They wore robes or perhaps armor, it was hard to tell, decorated with the same flowing symbols that covered everything else. And they were afraid. Arya could see it in the way the figures were drawn, hunched and huddled, looking up at something that loomed over them. "What are they afraid of?" Torrin asked, his voice rough with unease. Arya traced the mural with her eyes, following the story it told, the people fleeing, buildings collapsing, and then, rising from the water between the islands, something vast and dark. Not a dragon, not anything she recognized, just a shape, massive and terrible, with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to burn even in faded paint. "Something from the sea," she said quietly. "Something that came up from the deep." Koja made a sound in her throat, something between a curse and a prayer. "My people have stories," she said. "Old stories from before the summer islands were settled. Stories about things that live in the deepest parts of the ocean, where the light never reaches. Things that do not think like men or beasts. Things that are older than the world itself. We do not speak of them often. It is considered unlucky." "Do you believe the stories?" Arya asked. Koja was silent for a moment, staring at the mural. "I did not," she said finally. "Before. But now I am not so sure." They explored 3 more buildings, each one similar to the first. More murals, more symbols, more evidence of a civilization that had thrived here once and then vanished. In one of the buildings, they found what might have been a library, though the scrolls and books had long since rotted away, leaving only fragments and stains on stone shelves. In another, they found weapons, or what had once been weapons. Strange things made of metal that had corroded into unrecognizable shapes. And everywhere there was the sense of fear. Of something terrible that had happened here, something that had driven these people to abandon their homes and flee, or, perhaps, something that had killed them all. Arya felt it in the air, in the silence, in the way the ruins seemed to lean inward, as if trying to protect themselves from the sea. They returned to the beach as the sun was setting, the sky turning the color of blood. Davith wanted to return to the ship, to spend the night in safer waters, and decide in the morning whether to explore further. But as they approached the boat, one of the sailors pointed toward the water and shouted. There was someone standing on the rocks at the edge of the bay, a figure in ragged clothing, watching them with eyes that reflected the dying light. Human, or close enough to human that Arya could not tell the difference from this distance. Davith drew his sword. "Who are you?" he called in the common tongue, then in Bravosi, then in the pigeon trade language used in ports from Old Town to Karth. The figure did not respond. It simply stood there, watching, its face hidden in shadow. Arya felt her heart quicken. They were not alone here. This place was not as empty as it seemed. "We mean no harm," Arya said, stepping forward. Davith tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off. "We are explorers, travelers. We come in peace." The figure tilted its head, a strangely bird-like gesture, and then it raised one arm and pointed toward the largest of the ruined towers. And then it was gone, disappearing behind the rocks so quickly that Arya was not entirely sure it had been there at all. "What in the name of all the gods was that?" Torrin breathed. "Someone who lives here," Arya said, "or someone who knows this place. Either way, we need to find them." "We need to leave," Davith countered. "Now, before whatever that was comes back with friends." But Arya was already moving, climbing over the rocks toward where the figure had stood. Behind her, she heard Davith curse and order the others to follow. They caught up with her quickly, weapons drawn, moving in a defensive formation. The rocks were slippery, with spray from the waves, and twice Arya nearly lost her footing. But she kept going, driven by a need she could not fully explain. They had come so far. They had survived storms and doubt and the fading of the known world. She could not turn back now, not when they had finally found something real. The figure was waiting for them on the other side of the rocks, standing in the entrance to the tower it had pointed toward. Up close, Arya could see that it was a woman, or had been once. Her skin was dark and weathered, her hair white and tangled with shells and bits of seaweed. She wore clothing made from fish scales and woven kelp, and her feet were bare despite the sharp rocks. But it was her eyes that made Arya's breath catch. They were the same color as the sea around the islands, that strange shifting blue-green that seemed to hold depths no human eye should have. The woman spoke, her voice like wind over broken glass. The language was nothing Arya had ever heard, harsh and musical at the same time, full of sounds that seemed impossible for a human throat to make. But her meaning was clear enough. She gestured to the tower, to the ruins, to the islands themselves, and then she pointed at the sea and made a gesture that needed no translation. Danger. Stay away. "We do not understand," Arya said slowly, carefully. "Can you speak any language we know?" The woman stared at her for a long moment, and then she smiled. It was not a comforting expression. Her teeth were filed to points, and there were too many of them. When she spoke again, her voice was different, slower, shaped around words that sounded almost like the common tongue, but twisted, as if she were speaking around something in her mouth. "You should not be here," she said. "The waters are wrong. The tides are changing. When they change, things rise. Things that should stay buried. Things that hunger." "What things?" Koja asked, her voice steady, despite the fear Arya could see in her eyes. The woman's smile faded. "You saw the paintings. You saw what our ancestors feared. It is not legend. It is not myth. It sleeps in the deep places. in the trenches where the light cannot reach. But the sleeper wakes when the tides are wrong. And the tides are wrong now, wrong for the first time in 1,000 years. "How many of you are here?" David asked. "How many people live on these islands?" 17, the woman said. "All that remain. Once there were thousands. Cities on every island, ships that sailed to lands you have never heard of. But the sleeper woke, and the cities fell, and those who did not flee died screaming. We are what is left, the watchers, the warning, and now we warn you. Leave this place, sail back to wherever you came from. Do not go west. There is nothing there but death." Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What is west of here? What did your people find when they sailed that way?" The woman's eyes went distant, looking at something Arya could not see. "The edge," she whispered. "The place where the world breaks, where the water falls away into nothing. Our greatest ships sailed there once, in the days before the sleeper woke. They wanted to know what lay beyond. They never returned. But sometimes, when the tide is right, you can hear them screaming, even now, even after all these years." No one spoke. The only sound was the wind and the waves and the distant hiss of steam from the mountain. Arya wanted to dismiss the woman's words as madness or superstition, but she could not. There was too much fear in this place, too much evidence of something terrible that had happened here. "We have lost a crew member," Arya said, though she had not realized it until the words left her mouth. "One of the sailors. He was with us this morning, but now he is gone." The woman nodded slowly. "The tide took him. It takes one every time ships come here. A price, a warning. Leave now before it takes more." David grabbed Arya's arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "We are leaving. Now." But Arya pulled free. She looked at the woman, at this survivor of a civilization that had fallen to something from the depths, and she made a choice. "We will leave in the morning," she said. "But first, tell me everything you know about what lies west, everything your people learned before they stopped sailing. I will pay you. Gold, supplies, whatever you need." The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What use is gold to the dead? What use are supplies when the sleeper wakes?" But then her expression softened, just slightly. "You are brave, foolish, but brave. Very well, I will tell you what I know. But do not say I did not warn you when you joined the screaming ships at the edge of the world." She turned and walked into the tower, and after a moment's hesitation, Arya followed. Behind her, she heard David curse, and the others argue in harsh whispers. But they followed too, because that was what explorers did. They followed the path into the unknown, even when every instinct screamed at them to run, especially then. The woman's name was Thessaly, or something close to it. The words she spoke had sounds that did not quite fit in any language Arya knew, but Thessaly was near enough. She led them up the spiral stairs inside the tower, stairs worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, but here they seemed different, more deliberate, arranged in patterns that might have been prayers or warnings, or both. At the top of the tower was a chamber open to the sky. The roof had collapsed long ago, leaving only a ring of broken stone around the edges. But someone had made a home here despite the ruin. There were sleeping mats woven from dried seaweed, clay pots filled with water, dried fish hanging from lines strung between the remaining pillars, and charts. Dozens of them, spread across the floor, held down by stones and shells. Maps of the islands, of the currents, of the waters beyond. Thessaly knelt beside the largest map and gestured for them to sit. Arya and Koja sat across from her, while Davith and the others stood watch by the stairs, their hands never far from their weapons. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, and stars were beginning to appear, hard and bright and cold. "Your people sailed west," Arya said, "before the sleeper woke. What did they find?" Thessaly's fingers traced the map, following lines that curved and twisted like currents made visible. "They found land," she said. "Many lands. Islands at first, scattered and strange. Then larger masses, continents perhaps, though none of our ships ever mapped them completely. The world is larger than your Westeros imagines, larger and stranger and older." "What kind of people lived there?" Koja asked, leaning forward. Her navigator's eyes were hungry, drinking in every detail of the maps. "Different in every place," Thessaly said. "Some were like us, human enough to trade with, to speak with. Others were less human, not monsters, but not men either, changed by their lands perhaps, or by something in the water. There were cities built into cliffs, markets that floated on the water, temples carved from single pieces of stone larger than mountains. Our traders brought back wonders, metals that never rusted, cloth that could not burn, spices that made men dream of other lives." "And then the sleeper woke," Arya said quietly. Thessaly's expression darkened. "And then the sleeper woke. It started with the tides. They became unpredictable, violent. Ships that knew these waters for generations suddenly found themselves lost, driven onto rocks or pulled into whirlpools that appeared without warning. Then the disappearances began. Ships leaving port and never arriving at their destination. Entire crews vanishing in the space of a night. And finally, the attacks." "What attacked you?" Torrhen asked from his position by the stairs. "We never saw it clearly," Thessaly said. "Not the whole of it. It came at night, rising from the deepest water between the islands. Tentacles, we think. Or perhaps arms. Too many to count. Large enough to pull down buildings, to crush ships like kindling. And it was hungry. Not for food, not in the way animals hunger. It wanted something else. Fear, perhaps. Suffering. It would take people and leave them alive at first, screaming in the water until others came to help. And then it would take them too." Arya felt her skin prickle. She had faced the dead at Winterfell, had walked the halls of the House of Black and White, had killed men who deserved killing and some who had not. But this was different. This was something beyond death, beyond human cruelty. This was the indifference of the deep-made flesh. "How did you survive?" she asked. "We stopped going into the deep water," Thessaly said simply. "We stayed close to shore, in the shallows, where the sleeper could not reach. We abandoned our cities, our ships, our whole way of life, and we waited. Years became decades, became centuries. The sleeper went back to sleep eventually, or moved on to hunt in other waters. But we never forgot. We became watchers, warnings for any who might sail these waters again." "And now you say the tides are wrong again," Koja said. "How do you know?" Thessaly pointed to one of the clay pots. Inside was water, dark and still. "Watch," she said. They watched. For a long moment, nothing happened. And then the water began to move, swirling in a pattern that should not have been possible in a closed container. It formed a spiral, tightening toward the center, faster and faster until it seemed the water itself might tear apart. And then it stopped all at once, becoming still again as if nothing had happened. "The water remembers," Thessaly said. "It knows when the deep places are stirring. This started 3 weeks ago, small movements at first. Now it happens every few hours. The sleeper is waking again." Davith swore, under his breath. "We need to leave. Tonight. Now." But Arya was studying the maps, her mind racing. "You said your people found lands to the west. Cities. People. Are they still there?" "I do not know," Thessaly admitted. "We have not sailed that far in 500 years. Perhaps they thrived. Perhaps the sleeper found them too. Perhaps they are nothing but ruins now, like our own cities. But the maps are accurate, as far as they go. The currents, the landmarks, the approximate distances. If you are fool enough to continue, they will guide you." "I will buy them from you," Arya said. "Name your price." Thessaly laughed, that same broken glass sound. "I already told you, gold means nothing to the dead. But these maps are not mine to sell. They belong to all who remain on these islands. If you want them, you must ask the Gathering." "Then take me to the Gathering," Arya said. Davith grabbed her shoulder. "Arya, listen to yourself. This woman is warning us about monsters from the deep, about tides that pull ships to their doom, about screaming at the edge of the world. And you want to keep going?" "I did not come this far to turn back because of stories," Arya said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they were not entirely true. These were not just stories. The ruins were real. The fear in this place was real. The water swirling in that pot was real. But she had made a choice when she left Winterfell, when she sailed past the edge of the maps. She had chosen the unknown over the safe, and she would not abandon that choice now, even if it killed her, especially if it killed her. "The Gathering meets at dawn," Thessaly said, rising to her feet. "On the central island, where the old council hall still stands. I will take you there. But know this, my people will not give you the maps easily. They will test you, they will question you, and if they decide you are not worthy, you will leave these islands with nothing." "I will take that chance," Arya said. They spent the night in the tower, taking turns on watch while the others tried to sleep. Arya lay on one of the woven mats, staring up at the stars through the broken roof, and thought about everything Thessaly had told them. Lands to the west, cities and people and wonders, and something in the deep that woke when the tides were wrong. She should have been afraid. She was afraid. But beneath the fear was something else. Excitement. Hunger. The same feeling she'd gotten when she first arrived in Braavos, when the whole city had spread out before her like a puzzle waiting to be solved. At dawn, Thessaly led them down to the beach and into a small boat made from driftwood and sealed with something that looked like tree sap, but smelled like the sea. They rowed between the islands, following a channel that twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, until Arya realized they were avoiding the deep water, staying in the shallows where the ancient terror could not reach. The central island was the smallest of the inhabited ones, just a rocky outcrop with a single building clinging to its peak. The building was different from the others, less melted-looking, more deliberately constructed. It had walls and a roof, windows that had been covered with woven mats to keep out the wind, and outside it, waiting, were the others. 17 people, Thessaly had said. Arya counted them now, men and women, old and young, all with that same weathered look, that same strange colour in their eyes, the remnants of a civilization. They gathered in a circle inside the council hall, sitting on the floor because there were no chairs, no furniture of any kind. Thessaly spoke to them in her harsh, musical language, gesturing to Arya and the others, explaining why they had come. The watchers listened in silence, their faces unreadable. Finally, one of them spoke. An old man with a beard that hung to his waist and hands twisted with age. He spoke in the broken common tongue, better than Thessaly's, but still strange, shaped around sounds that did not quite fit. "You want our maps?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Arya said. "I want to know what lies west. I want to explore the lands your people found, and I am willing to pay for the knowledge." "We do not want your gold," the old man said. "Gold cannot bring back our dead. Gold cannot make the sleeper sleep. But you have something else we need, a question that needs answering." "What question?" Arya asked. The old man's eyes fixed on her, and for the first time she saw real emotion there. Anger, grief, desperation. 5 days ago, one of our young men took a boat and sailed east, toward your lands, toward Westeros. He wanted to leave this place, to find a life that was not just watching and waiting and fearing the deep. We tried to stop him, but he would not listen. His name is Davin. He is the son of my daughter, and he is all I have left. Arya felt something tighten in her chest. She knew where this was going. "We do not know your laws," the old man continued. "We do not know your justice. But Davin took something that was not his when he left. A relic from the old times, a carved stone that belongs to all of us, not to any one person. He took it because he thought it would bring him luck, or perhaps because he wanted to sell it. We do not know. But without it, we cannot perform the rites that keep us safe, the rites that keep the sleeper at bay." "You want me to find him," Arya said. "If he reached your lands, yes. If he is alive, yes. Bring him back. Bring back the stone. Do this, and the maps are yours. Refuse, and you leave with nothing." Davith stepped forward. "We do not have time for this. We have already lost one crew member. The tides are wrong. We need to leave now, while we still can." But Arya was not listening to him. She was thinking about the young man who had fled this place, who had chosen the unknown over the safety of his people, just as she had. She understood that choice. She respected it. But she also understood what it meant to belong to something larger than yourself, to have responsibilities you couldn't simply abandon. "We passed no boats on our way here," she said carefully. "If he sailed east 5 days ago, we should have seen him." "The currents," Koja said quietly. "They have been strange. He might have been pushed north or south. He could be anywhere along the coast by now. Or he could have capsized in the storms." The old man's face hardened. "Then you will search the coast. You will ask in the ports. You will find out what happened to him. This is our price for the maps. This is our justice." Arya looked at Davith, at Koja, at the others. She could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear. They wanted to leave, to put these cursed islands behind them and sail for safer waters. And she could not blame them. But the maps were here. The knowledge was here. The path west was here. And it was being offered for a price she could actually pay. "I will find him," she said. "Or I will find out what happened to him. And I will bring back the stone. You have my word." "The word of a stranger means nothing," the old man said. "But Thessaly says you're Arya Stark, daughter of the North, trained by the faceless men. If this is true, then perhaps your word has weight. We will wait 1 month. If you return with Davin or the stone or proof of what happened to him, the maps are yours. If you do not return, or if you return with nothing, you will leave these islands and never come back." He stood, and the gathering stood with him. The meeting was over. The bargain was struck. Outside, Davith grabbed Arya's arm hard enough to hurt. "You just agreed to delay our voyage by a month, maybe longer. For people we do not know, in a place we do not understand, chasing a boy who probably drowned days ago. Have you lost your mind?" "Maybe," Arya said. She pulled her arm free and looked back at the council hall, at the watchers who had given up everything to warn strangers about dangers they could not see. But this is what explorers do. We do not just take. We trade. We help. We earn the knowledge we seek. And these people need help, so we will help them. "And what about the missing crew member?" Torren asked. "The one the tide took, according to Thessaly. What about him?" Arya had not forgotten. One of their own was gone, vanished sometime during the night or the early morning. She did not know if the woman's talk of tides and prices was real or superstition, but real or not, they had lost someone, and that meant this place was dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. "We search the islands," she said, "before we leave. We make sure he is not here, hurt or lost, and if we do not find him, we accept that the sea took him. The sea takes everyone eventually, but we do not abandon our search for Davin because of it. We do both." They found no trace of their missing crew member. They searched every beach, every ruin, every cave they could reach. They called his name until their voices were hoarse. But there was nothing. No body, no blood, no sign that he had ever existed at all. It was as if the island had swallowed him whole. As they rowed back to the ship in the late afternoon, Arya noticed something. The water in the channels between the islands was moving faster than it had been that morning. The currents were changing, shifting, responding to forces she could not see. And in the deepest channels, where the water turned almost black, she thought she saw something moving, something large, something that did not belong in any world she knew. She did not mention it to the others. They were frightened enough already. But she gripped Needle a little tighter and promised herself that she would not underestimate this place again. The unknown was not just mystery and wonder. It was also danger. And danger had teeth. They sailed east along the coast for 8 days, searching every inlet and bay for signs of Davin or his boat. The weather held, the winds were favourable, but the searching was slow work. Each time they spotted something that might be a vessel, they had to change course, draw close enough to see, and then sail on when it proved to be driftwood, or fishing nets tangled on rocks. The crew grew restless. Mal and the brothers, who wanted to leave, became openly hostile, muttering about wasted time and fool's errands. Even Torren, usually steady as stone, began to question the wisdom of hunting for a boy who was almost certainly dead. Arya spent her days at the bow, watching the coastline slide past. It was different here than the lands she knew. The trees were twisted and low, bent by constant wind, and their leaves were the colour of old copper. The beaches were black sand or white stone, never the familiar brown of Westerosi shores. And there were no villages, no keeps, no signs of human habitation. Just empty coast stretching on and on, as if they had sailed to a world where people had never existed at all. On the 9th day, they found the boat. It was wedged between two rocks in a narrow cove, its hull split open like a gutted fish. The wood was the same dark material as the debris they had pulled from the sea weeks ago, carved with the flowing symbols of Thessaly's people. The mast had snapped near the base, and the sail was gone, torn away by wind or wave. But the boat itself was recognizable, and more importantly, it was recent. The wood had not yet begun to rot, and there were supplies still lashed to what remained of the deck. Water casks, dried fish, a bundle of clothes wrapped in oiled leather. Davith ordered the ship to anchor, and they rowed ashore. Arya was first out of the boat, her boots splashing through shallow water, her hand already on needle. The cove was small and sheltered, the kind of place a sailor in trouble might choose to beach a damaged vessel. But there was no sign of Davin, no footprints in the sand, no evidence of a camp, no body. "He made it this far," Koja said, examining the wreckage. "The damage is recent, maybe 3 or 4 days old. The storm we had last week could have done this. Driven him onto the rocks, broken the hull. If he was lucky, he got ashore before the boat went down." "And if he was not lucky?" Torrin asked. Koja did not answer. She did not need to. They all knew what happened to sailors who went into cold water with a damaged ship. The sea did not give second chances. "Spread out," Arya said. "Search the cove and the area around it. Look for tracks, blood, anything that tells us what happened. And look for the stone, the relic he took. If he died here, it might still be with him." They searched for 3 hours. The cove led to a narrow ravine that cut inland through the black rock, and they followed it as far as they dared, calling Davin's name, listening for any response. There was nothing. No tracks, no camps, no body. Just silence and stone and the distant cry of seabirds. It was one of the Braavosi sailors who found the first sign. A piece of fabric, torn and blood-stained, caught on a thorn bush near the top of the ravine. The blood was old, dried to a brown crust, but it was human blood. Arya knew the smell of it too well to mistake it for anything else. "He was hurt," she said, holding the fabric up to the light. "But he was alive, at least for a while. He got out of the cove and headed inland." "Why inland?" Davith asked. "If his boat was wrecked, the smart thing would be to stay on the coast. Wait for another ship to pass. Build a signal fire." "Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly," Arya said. "Maybe he was hurt worse than we think. Or maybe he saw something that made him run." They followed the ravine deeper inland, moving slowly, weapons drawn. The land rose steadily, and the vegetation grew thicker, the twisted trees giving way to something closer to a forest. The light was strange here, filtered through leaves that were too red, too purple, colors that should not exist in nature. And there were sounds, not birds or animals, but something else. A low humming that seemed to come from the ground itself, rhythmic and constant, like a heartbeat. "I do not like this," Torrin said, his knuckles white on his sword hilt. "This place feels wrong." Arya felt it too, the same wrongness she had felt on the volcanic islands, but different. Not the wrongness of ancient ruins and sleeping horrors. This was something else, something alive. The forest was watching them. She was sure of it. They found the stone at the base of a massive tree, its trunk wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder. The stone was about the size of a man's head, smooth and black, covered in the flowing symbols that seemed to be the written language of Thessaly's people. It sat in a small clearing, placed deliberately on a flat rock, as if someone had left it there on purpose. And around it, arranged in a careful circle, were offerings. Dried fish, shells, strips of cloth, and flowers, bright yellow flowers that grew nowhere else in this forest. "He left it here," Kodja said quietly, "as an offering." "To what?" Before anyone could answer, they heard the voices. They came from deeper in the forest, singing in a language that made Arya's skin prickle. It was not the harsh musical speech of Thessaly's people. This was something older, something that predated human language entirely. The words, if they were words, seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to something deep in her brain, triggering memories that were not hers. Snow falling on a forest older than time, wolves running through darkness, a woman's voice calling a name she had never heard, but somehow knew. The crew drew together, weapons raised, facing the direction of the singing. And then the singers emerged from the trees. There were 5 of them, moving in a line, their bodies swaying to the rhythm of their song. They looked human at first glance. Arms, legs, faces, all in the right places. But as they came closer, Arya saw the differences. Their skin had a faint greenish tint, like copper left in water. Their eyes were too large and too dark, pupils dilated so wide there was almost no white visible, and their fingers were webbed, thin membranes stretching between each digit, translucent in the strange light. They stopped singing when they saw the crew. For a long moment, nobody moved. The forest held its breath. And then one of the singers stepped forward, a woman with hair the colour of kelp and a face that might have been beautiful if it had been entirely human. She looked at Arya, at the stone, and then at Arya again. When she spoke, her voice was like water over stones, each word carefully shaped and surprisingly clear. "You come for the one who left this gift," she said. "The lost sailor, the frightened child." "You have seen him?" Arya asked, keeping her voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Do you know where he is?" The woman tilted her head, studying Arya with those 2 large eyes. "He came to us 3 days past, bleeding, afraid, calling out in a tongue we did not know. We gave him water, shelter, healing for his wounds, and he gave us this." She gestured to the stone. "A thing of power, a thing that speaks to the deep waters. We have not seen such a thing in many turnings of the moon." "Where is he now?" Davith demanded. "We need to take him back to his people." "His people cast him out," the woman said. "He told us this. Said he could not live in that place of death and waiting. Said he would rather die free than live as a prisoner of fear." "They did not cast him out," Arya said. "He left. And he took something that belonged to them all, not just to him. We need to return it, and we need to know if he is alive." The woman was silent for a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to something the others could not hear. The other singers remained motionless, barely even breathing, their webbed hands held at their sides. Finally, the woman spoke again. "He lives, but he does not wish to return. He has asked us for sanctuary, for a place among our people, and we have considered his request." "Why would he want to stay with you?" Kodja asked, her navigator's mind clearly working through possibilities. "No offense meant, but you are not his kind. He would be alone here." The woman smiled, and Arya saw that her teeth were pointed, filed, or grown that way, she could not tell. You think we are so different. You think the boundaries between peoples are as clear as your maps show. We are not so different, child of the islands. Your ancestors and ours share blood, share history. Before the breaking of the world, before the waters rose and the land sank and the people scattered, we remember. Your people have forgotten, but we remember. What do you remember? Arya asked, leaning forward despite the warning looks from Davith and the others. The woman's smile faded. We remember the long night that came before all nights. We remember the cold that killed the world. We remember the voices in the dark, calling to the living, demanding entry. And we remember those who fought, those who stood against the dark with fire and iron and courage. Your people called them the first men. We called them something else. But they were the same. And when the night ended and the world lived again, some of them went east to your lands. And some stayed here with us. And the blood mixed, and the stories became confused. But the truth remains. We are cousins, you and I, separated by time and distance and choice, but cousins still. Arya felt something click in her mind. The murals on the volcanic islands, the stories of the long night that every culture seemed to share, the legends that echoed across impossible distances. It was not coincidence. It was memory. Shared memory of something that had happened to all of humanity, all across the world. The long night had not been limited to Westeros. It had been everywhere. The stories, she said slowly, the myths your people tell, do they mention wolves? Dire wolves? The woman's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time Arya saw real emotion there. Surprise. The great wolves, yes. They are in the oldest songs, the wolves that walked with the first fighters, the wolves that could smell the dead from miles away, the wolves that never abandoned their bonded ones, even unto death. You know of them. I had a direwolf once, Arya said quietly. Her name was Nymeria. I sent her away to save her life. I have not seen her since. The woman stepped closer, and the other singers moved with her, maintaining their careful formation. The bond between human and wolf is sacred, old. It predates language, predates civilization. If you had such a bond, then you carry something precious, something that marks you as kin to the old ones, the ones who fought the dark and won. She reached out slowly, her webbed hand extended. Arya did not move as the woman touched her forehead, her fingers cool and slightly damp. The contact sent a shiver through her, and for a moment she saw things. Flashes of images that couldn't be memories, but felt like them anyway. A great wolf running through snow. A battle fought under a sky of green lights. A girl with Arya's face, but different, older, wearing furs and carrying a spear made of dragonglass. And then the images were gone, and she was back in the forest, breathing hard, the woman's hand still on her forehead. You are marked, the woman whispered, by death, by life, by the old powers that sleep beneath the world. You walk between, neither here nor there, neither one thing nor another. No wonder you seek the unknown. It is the only place that fits you. She lowered her hand and stepped back. I will bring the sailor to you, not because I must, but because the stone should return to his people. It has power, but it is their power, not his, not ours. And power used wrongly brings only sorrow. She turned and spoke to the other singers in their liquid language. Two of them disappeared into the forest, moving so quietly that Arya lost sight of them within seconds. The others remained, standing perfectly still, watching the crew with those unnerving eyes. They waited in silence. The humming from the ground continued, steady and eternal. Arya found herself thinking about what the woman had said. Cousins separated by time and choice. The long night as a shared experience. The direwolves as markers of those who had fought the darkness. It reframed everything she thought she knew about the world. Westeros was not the center. It was just one place among many. One fragment of a larger story that had been broken and scattered, and half forgotten. Davin arrived with the two singers supporting him. He was young, maybe 17 or 18, with the same weathered skin and strange eyes as Thessaly's people. But his eyes were full of fear now, fear and resignation. He saw Arya and the crew and seemed to shrink into himself. "I will not go back," he said in the broken common tongue. "You cannot make me. I would rather die here than return to those islands." "Your grandfather asked us to find you," Arya said gently. "He is worried about you. Your people need the stone you took. Without it, they cannot perform the rites that keep them safe." "The rites are lies," Davin said bitterly. "Old superstitions. There is nothing in the deep water but fish and darkness. The sleeper is a story to keep us afraid, to keep us trapped. I will not live that way. I will not." Arya looked at him, at this young man who had fled the only life he had ever known, who had chosen uncertainty over the safety of tradition. She understood him better than he could possibly know. But she also understood his grandfather, and the Watchers, and the weight of responsibility to something larger than yourself. "You do not have to go back," she said finally. "But the stone does. That is the bargain. Return the stone, and you are free to choose your own path. Stay here with these people, or sail east to Westeros, or find some other life entirely. But the stone goes back." Davin stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman who had spoken earlier, seeking guidance or permission, or both. The woman nodded slightly, and Davin's shoulders sagged. He was beaten, and he knew it. "The stone is yours," he said quietly. "Take it. Tell my grandfather I am alive. Tell him I am sorry. But tell him I am not coming back." Arya picked up the stone, surprised by its weight. It was heavier than it looked, and warm to the touch despite sitting in the shade. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shift and move when she was not looking directly at them, a trick of the light, or something else. She wrapped it in her cloak and handed it to Torrin for safekeeping. "Thank you," she said to the woman and the singers, "for helping him, for speaking with us, for sharing your knowledge." The woman inclined her head. "The lost need guidance. The curious deserve answers. You will go west when you return the stone." "Yes," Arya said. "Then I will give you guidance. The lands beyond are not empty. They are old and strange and full of peoples who remember things your Westeros has forgotten. But they are not hostile, not to those who come in peace. Learn their languages, respect their ways. And most importantly, remember that you are not the first. Others have sailed these waters. Others have made these discoveries. You are simply the first from your land in many generations. Humility will serve you better than pride." "I will remember," Arya promised. They left the forest as the sun was setting, the stone heavy in Torrin's pack. Davin's fate decided. The crew was quiet on the row back to the ship. They had seen too much, learned too much. The world was larger and stranger than any of them had imagined, and they were only beginning to understand how small they truly were in the face of it. That night, as the ship sailed back toward the volcanic islands, Arya stood at the stern and watched the strange coast fade into darkness. Somewhere in that forest, Davin was beginning a new life among people who were human, but not quite human. Cousins, the woman had called them. Family separated by the breaking of the world. Arya touched the wolf clasp on her cloak and thought about Nymeria, wondered if her direwolf was still alive somewhere, leading a pack of her own. And she thought about the bonds that connected all living things, bonds that stretched across distance and time and species. The world was not divided into neat categories. It was messy and complicated and beautiful, and she was going to see as much of it as she possibly could. The unknown was waiting, and so was she. They reached the volcanic islands 12 days after leaving with Davin Stone. The winds had been against them for most of the journey, forcing the ship to tack endlessly, fighting for every mile. The crew was exhausted, tempers were short, and the ship itself was showing signs of strain. A leak had developed in the hull, small but persistent, requiring constant bailing. The mainmast, already cracked from the earlier storm, had developed new splinters that creaked ominously with every gust of wind. And worst of all, their supplies were running low. The food they had brought from White Harbour was nearly gone, and what remained was stale bread and salted meat that tasted of mould and desperation. When the black peaks of the islands finally appeared on the horizon, there was no celebration. Just a weary relief and the grim knowledge that they still had to navigate the treacherous channels to reach the inhabited shores. Davith guided the ship carefully, following the path Thessaly had shown them, staying in the shallows where the water was clear enough to see the rocks beneath. They anchored in the same bay as before, and Arya rowed, ashore with the stone wrapped carefully in her cloak. Thessaly was waiting on the beach as if she had known they would return this day, this hour. The old man stood beside her, the grandfather who had sent them searching for his grandson. His face was unreadable as Arya approached, but his hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the stone and held it out to him. "Davin lives," Arya said. "He will not return. He has chosen a different path, but he wanted you to know he is alive and that he is sorry." The old man took the stone with both hands, cradling it like a child. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he looked up at Arya, and she saw tears running down his weathered cheeks. "He is alive," he whispered. "That is enough. That is more than I dared hope." "He found people in the forest," Arya continued. "Not like us, but not entirely different either. They have given him sanctuary. He seems happy there, or at least happier than he was on these islands." The old man nodded, slowly. He was always restless, always looking west, always dreaming of other places. I hoped he would grow out of it. I hoped he would accept his duty as a watcher. But I suppose some people are born to wander, and no amount of hoping will change that. He looked at Arya with something that might have been understanding. "You are the same, I think. A wanderer. That is why you understand him. That is why you did not force him to return." "I gave him a choice," Arya said. "That is all anyone can do." The old man smiled, a sad expression that held a lifetime of loss. "Choice is a luxury we have forgotten here. We have lived so long with fear that we forgot how to choose anything else. Perhaps that is the real curse of the sleeper. Not that it destroys us, but that it makes us destroy ourselves with our own caution. He turned to Thessaly and spoke in their language. Thessaly nodded and gestured for Arya to follow. They climbed to the council hall, where the maps were waiting, spread across the floor just as they had been during the gathering. The other watchers were there too, all 17 of them, watching in silence as the old man laid the stone in the center of their circle. "You have honored our bargain," he said to Arya in the common tongue. "You returned the stone. You brought news of Davon. The maps are yours, as promised. May they guide you to wonders, or may they guide you home again when the wonders prove too terrible to bear." Koja stepped forward, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. She knelt beside the maps and began studying them with the intensity of a maester reading a rare manuscript. Her fingers traced the lines, the currents, the landmarks. She asked questions in rapid Bravosi, which Thessaly translated into her own language, and then back again. The conversation went on for over an hour, navigator to navigator, sharing knowledge that had been locked away for 500 years. Arya watched and listened, learning what she could. The maps showed islands scattered in chains for hundreds of miles west of here, then a gap, a stretch of open ocean marked with warnings about storms and strange currents, and beyond that, a coastline, not islands, but a continent, massive and unexplored, at least by Thessaly's people. They had landed there once, the old maps said, had established a trading post on a wide river delta. But that had been before the sleep awoke, before the watchers retreated to their islands and gave up the sea. "This coastline," Koja said, tapping the map. "How old is this information?" 600 years, Thessaly replied. "Maybe more. The land could have changed, rivers shift, coasts erode. What was true then may not be true now." "But it is a place to start," Koja said. "A bearing, a destination, better than sailing blind into the west and hoping for the best." While Koja worked with the maps, Davith pulled Arya aside. His face was grave, and she knew what he was going to say before he said it. "We need to talk about the ship," he said quietly, "and the crew, and whether continuing west is even possible." "Tell me," Arya said. Davith sighed, running a hand through his greying hair. "The ship is in bad shape. The hull leak is getting worse. The mast will not survive another major storm. We are low on food, low on fresh water, and the crew is fractured. Mal and the brothers have been talking to the others, trying to convince them that going west is madness. And honestly, I am not sure they are wrong." "But you agreed to this voyage," Arya said. "You took my gold. You signed on for exploration, not a pleasure cruise along safe coasts." "I signed on for exploration, yes," Davith agreed. "But I also signed on to captain, which means keeping my crew alive. And right now, I am not sure I can do both. The smart thing would be to stop here, make repairs, resupply, maybe even recruit some of the watchers who might want to leave this place. And then head back to Westeros. We have discovered new lands, new peoples. That is more than most explorers can claim." Arya felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. "You want to turn back, now, after everything we have been through, after finding the maps, after learning about the lands to the west. You want to give up when we are finally close to something real." "I want to survive," Davith said, his voice hardening. "I want my crew to see their families again. I want to live long enough to spend the gold you paid me. Is that so terrible?" They stared at each other, the tension thick between them. Arya knew he was right, at least partially. The ship was in poor condition. The crew was afraid. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to turn back. But safe had never been what she wanted. Safe was Winterfell. Safe was marrying some lord and bearing his children and dying in a familiar bed surrounded by familiar faces. She had rejected that life. She had chosen this, and she could not turn back now, even if it was the smart choice. "Give me 3 days," she said finally. 3 days to make my case to the crew, to show them why continuing is worth the risk. And if after 3 days they still want to turn back, I will accept it. I will not force anyone to sail west against their will. David considered this, his jaw working. Then he nodded. 3 days. But Arya, you need to understand something. Most of these men and women did not sign on because they share your dream. They signed on because you paid well. Gold motivates. Fear motivates stronger. And right now, they are afraid. You are going to need more than speeches to change their minds. That night, Arya stood on the deck of the ship and looked out at the volcanic islands, dark silhouettes against a sky full of stars. The crew was below, some sleeping, others talking in low voices about what came next. She could hear fragments of conversation drifting up through the hatch. Mal's voice, loud and insistent, arguing for a return to Westeros. Torrhen's voice, quieter but firm, saying they should at least hear Arya out. Others weighing in with their own fears, their own hopes, their own calculations of risk and reward. Arya thought about what Davith had said, that gold and fear were the great motivators, that speeches would not be enough. She needed to give them something else, something that made the risk worthwhile. But what did she have to offer that was worth more than their lives? The answer came to her slowly, like dawn breaking over the sea. She did not have gold or promises of glory, but she had truth. She had the knowledge that the world was larger and stranger than they had been taught. She had the proof in these islands, in the singers in the forest, in the maps that showed lands no Westerosi had ever seen. And she had a choice to offer them. Not the choice between safety and danger, but the choice between living a life that mattered and living a life that did not. Over the next 3 days, Arya worked. She did not give speeches. She did not try to convince anyone with words alone. Instead, she invited the crew ashore in small groups. She showed them the ruins, let them see the murals that depicted civilizations older than Valyria. She took them to meet Thessaly and the other Watchers. Let them hear the stories of the Sleeper and the breaking of the world. She brought them to the tower where the maps were kept. Let them see with their own eyes the documented evidence of lands to the west. And most importantly, she listened. She sat with each member of the crew and asked them what they wanted, what had brought them on this voyage, what they hoped to find, what they were running from. Mal wanted gold, enough to buy a ship of his own and never have to take orders from anyone again. Arya could not promise him that, but she could promise him a share of anything valuable they found. Not just material wealth, but knowledge. Maps. Information about new trade routes, new peoples, new resources. Information that could make a smart man very rich if he used it correctly. The Braavosi brothers wanted adventure, but not death. They had families, children who needed fathers. Arya couldn't promise them safety, but she could promise them a voice, a vote. If the crew decided the risk was too great at any point, they would turn back. No one person, not even her, would force them to continue against their collective will. Torren wanted purpose. He was old, past 50, and he had spent his life sailing the same routes, seeing the same ports, doing the same work year after year. He wanted to do something that mattered before he died. Arya could promise him that. This voyage mattered. Whatever they found, whatever they learned, it would change how people understood the world. It would be a legacy worth leaving. One by one, she worked through the crew. Some she convinced. Others remained skeptical. And a few, like Mal, seemed determined to leave no matter what she said. But by the end of the 3 days, something had shifted. The crew was no longer fractured between those who wanted to continue and those who wanted to leave. Instead, they were fractured between those who wanted to vote on it and those who wanted to decide individually. On the evening of the 3rd day, Davith called a gathering on deck. The entire crew assembled, standing in a loose circle, their faces lit by lanterns hung from the rigging. Thessaly had come as well, at Arya's invitation, along with 2 of the younger watchers who had expressed interest in joining the voyage. They stood at the edge of the circle, silent observers. "We have a choice to make," Davith said, his voice carrying over the gentle slap of waves against the hull. "Continue west or return to Westeros. Arya has made her case for continuing. Now it is time to hear from anyone else who wants to speak. After that, we vote. Majority decides. And whatever the majority decides, we all abide by it. No exceptions." Mal spoke, first, as Arya had known he would. "I say we turn back. We have been lucky so far, but luck runs out. The ship is damaged. We are low on supplies, and every day we stay out here is another day we might not make it home. I have a wife in Braavos. I have children. They are worth more to me than any amount of gold or glory or knowledge. I want to see them again, and the only way to guarantee that is to turn back now." Several crew members nodded in agreement. Arya could see the fear in their faces, the desire for familiar shores and familiar beds. She did not blame them for it. Fear was honest. Fear was real. Torren spoke next. "I respect what Mal is saying. Family is important. Home is important. But I am old enough to know that safety is an illusion. We could turn back tomorrow and be caught in a storm that sends us all to the bottom. We could make it to Westeros and die of plague in port. We could live to be 100 and die in our sleep, having done nothing worth remembering. Life is risk. The only question is what we are risking it for." He looked around the circle, his eyes hard and bright. "I say we continue, not because I do not value my life, but because I do. I want my life to mean something. I want to be able to say I saw things no one else has seen. I went places no one else has gone. And if that kills me, well, at least I died doing something that mattered." The 2 Braavosi brothers spoke together, finishing each other's sentences as brothers sometimes do. "We want to vote as a crew. Regular votes. Once a week, maybe. Check in. See how people are feeling. If the majority wants to keep going, we keep going. If the majority wants to turn back, we turn back. But we make the decision together, not as individuals splitting off." It was a compromise, and Arya could see it appealing to several of the undecided crew members. It gave them safety without cowardice, a way to continue without fully committing. Koja stood and unrolled one of Thessaly's maps, holding it up so everyone could see. "I am a navigator," she said. "I have spent my life studying currents and winds and the patterns of the sea, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that these maps are accurate. Not perfect, but accurate enough. We can reach the lands they describe. We can explore them. We can return. It is dangerous, yes. But it is possible, and anything that is possible is worth attempting at least once. She lowered the map. I vote to continue. One by one, the others spoke. Some voted to continue. Some voted to turn back. Some proposed variations on the Braavosi brothers' idea of regular votes and collective decision-making. Arya listened to all of it, her heart pounding, knowing that her dream of exploring the West hung on the choices these people would make. When everyone had spoken, Davith called for the vote. All in favour of continuing west, raise your hand. Arya raised hers immediately. Torrin, Koja, the Braavosi brothers, and 5 others followed. 9 votes to continue. All in favour of returning to Westeros, raise your hand. Mal and 3 others raised their hands. 4 votes to return. And all in favour of the compromise. Continue west, but vote weekly on whether to turn back, with majority rule. 7 hands went up, including Davith's. Arya felt something loosen in her chest. They were continuing. Not with the full crew's enthusiasm, but continuing nonetheless. It was enough. Then it is decided, David said. We sail west, but we vote weekly, and we honour whatever the crew decides. Agreed. There was a general murmur of agreement. Mal looked angry, but said nothing. The compromise had won, and even he could see the logic in it. Thessaly stepped forward into the circle. I have an offer, she said. 2 of our youngest watchers wish to join your crew. They are skilled sailors, and they know these waters better than anyone. They can guide you through the channels, help you avoid the deep places where the sleeper hunts. And when you reach the lands to the west, they can serve as interpreters. The old trade language is still used there, or was 600 years ago. It may help you make contact. Davith looked at Arya, raising an eyebrow in question. She nodded. More skilled hands on deck could only help, especially if they knew the waters. They are welcome, Davith said. We sail in 3 days. That gives us time to make what repairs we can and take on fresh water from the springs on the North Island. The gathering broke up, the crew dispersing to their tasks or their rest. Arya stayed on deck, watching the stars, feeling the familiar weight of choice settling on her shoulders. She had gotten what she wanted. They were continuing west. But the cost was responsibility. Every person on this ship was now her responsibility. Every decision she made affected them. Every risk she took, they took with her. Mal approached her as the deck emptied. His face was hard in the lantern light, all sharp angles and resentment. You got your way, he said. For now. But when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, remember that I tried to stop this. Remember that I wanted to save us. I will remember, Arya said quietly. And if things go wrong, I will take responsibility for it. That is what leaders do. Mal snorted. You are not a leader. You are a rich girl playing at adventure. The difference is that leaders know when to quit. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone on the deck with his words echoing in her mind. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was just playing at something she did not fully understand. But she had made her choice. She had chosen movement over stillness, the unknown over the familiar. And she would live with whatever consequences came from that choice. The ship sailed 3 days later, carrying a crew of 23 now, including the 2 young watchers. The volcanic islands fell away behind them, and the open ocean opened up ahead. Somewhere beyond the heat horizon was the continent marked on Thessaly's maps. Somewhere out there were peoples and cities, and mysteries waiting to be discovered. Arya stood at the bow and smiled into the wind. She was moving forward, always forward, and that was enough. 6 weeks into the western voyage, Arya Stark stood at the bow of the ship and watched the sun rise over waters that had never known a Westerosi name. The ocean here was a different colour than the seas near home, deeper blue with hints of violet when the light caught it right. The air tasted different too, carrying scents she could not identify, salt mixed with something floral and something else that reminded her of summer storms over the Trident. Everything was familiar enough to recognize, but strange enough to remind her that she was far, very far, from anything she had ever known. The voyage had not been easy. 2 more storms had battered them, each one worse than the last, testing the repaired mast and the crew's resolve. They had lost another sailor, a Braavosi named Kev, who had been washed overboard during the second storm despite being tied to the rigging. The rope had simply snapped, old and worn past its strength, and he had disappeared into the black water without even time to scream. They had searched for him until dawn, calling his name into the wind, but the sea had kept what it took. The weekly votes had continued. Each time, the margin to continue west had narrowed. After Kev's death, they had come within 1 vote of turning back. Mal had argued passionately for it, and even some who had voted to continue before wavered. But Torrin had stood firm, and Koija had shown them the charts, had proven they were more than halfway to the continent marked on Thessaly's maps. Turning back now would mean Kev had died for nothing. That argument had carried the day, but barely. The 2 watchers from the volcanic islands, a young man named Peter and a woman named Shasa, had proven their worth 12 times over. They knew the winds in ways the other sailors did not, could read the water's surface like Koija read her charts. They had guided the ship through channels between islands that appeared on no map but theirs, had found sources of fresh water on barren rocks, had shown them which fish were safe to eat, and which would leave a man writhing in agony. Without them, Arya was certain they would have turned back weeks ago or died trying to continue. But it was not just their practical skills that mattered. Peter and Shasa had also begun teaching Arya the old trade language, the tongue that Thessaly's people had once used to communicate with the western lands. It was a strange language, built from bits of 12 different tongues, simplified and regularized, so that people who shared no common speech could still conduct business and tell stories. Arya had a gift for languages, honed during her time in Braavos, and she picked it up quickly. Each night, she sat with Peter and Shasa and practiced, learning words for sail and storm and stranger and home. That word meant something different now than it had when she left Winterfell. It was not a place anymore. Not really. It was more like a feeling, something she carried inside her that had nothing to do with stone walls or familiar faces. She thought about Sansa sometimes, wondered if her sister was thinking of her too, wondered if Jon had found peace beyond the wall, wondered if any of them would recognize her if she returned, changed as she was by everything she had seen. She touched the wolf clasp on her cloak, Sansa's gift, and felt the usual mix of longing and determination. She was a Stark. That had not changed. But being a Stark no longer meant what it once had. She was redefining it with every mile westward, making it into something new, something that belonged to the unknown as much as to the north. "Land," Koja called from the crow's nest, her voice cutting through Arya's thoughts. "Land ahead!" The crew erupted into activity, everyone rushing to their stations or to the rails to see. Arya climbed the rigging, her hands sure on the rope despite the ship's motion, and joined Koja in the crow's nest. The navigator pointed west, and Arya followed her finger. There, on the horizon, was a dark line, not clouds, not another island chain. Land, real land. A coastline that stretched north and south as far as the eye could see, which meant it was not an island at all. It was the continent from the maps. They had found it. "How far?" Arya asked, her heart racing. "Half a day's sail, maybe less if the wind holds," Koja said. Her face was split by a grin, the first real smile Arya had seen from her in weeks. "We did it. We actually did it. We sailed beyond the edge of the known world and found something real." They made landfall in the early afternoon, approaching a wide bay where a river emptied into the sea. The water here was brown with silt, and they could see vegetation on both shores, thick forests that came right down to the water's edge. There were birds, thousands of them, wheeling and crying in the air. And there was smoke, thin columns rising from somewhere inland, too regular to be natural fires. People. There were people here. Davith anchored the ship in deep water and ordered the boat lowered. Arya went in the first boat, along with Davith, Koja, Peter, Shasa, and Torin. They rowed toward shore slowly, weapons ready but not drawn, every sense alert for signs of danger. The beach was sandy and white, marked with footprints from animals Arya did not recognize. 4-toed prints larger than her hand, long drag marks that could have been from snakes or tails, and human footprints too, small and bare, leading up from the water toward the tree line. They beached the boat and climbed out, and for the second time since leaving Westeros, Arya felt solid ground beneath her feet. It felt different from the volcanic islands, warmer somehow, more welcoming. The sand was soft, the air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the forest were alive with chirps and buzzes and calls from creatures she could not see. A figure emerged from the trees, a child, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with skin the color of dark honey and hair that fell in black waves to her waist. She wore a simple garment made from woven plant fibers, dyed in shades of green and blue. She stopped at the edge of the beach and stared at them with enormous dark eyes, her expression more curious than afraid. Arya stepped forward slowly, her hands held out to show she carried no weapon. She spoke in the trade language Peter had taught her, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "Hello, we come in peace. We are travelers from far away. We mean no harm." The child tilted her head, listening. Then she smiled, and Arya saw that her teeth had been filed to gentle points, decorative rather than threatening. She responded in the same trade language, her pronunciation different from what Arya had learned but close enough to understand. "You speak the old words," the child said. "The grandmother words. My mother will want to meet you. She collects people who speak the grandmother words. Will you come?" Arya looked back at Davith. The captain nodded slowly. They had come this far. They could not turn back now without at least trying to make contact. "We will come," Arya said to the child. "But our ship must stay safe. Can you promise us that?" "The Water Mothers protect all ships in the bay," the child said, as if this were obvious. "No harm will come to your ship. This I promise in their name." She turned and walked back toward the trees, and after a moment's hesitation, Arya followed. The others came behind, hands on weapons, eyes scanning the forest for any sign of ambush, but none came. The child led them along a well-worn path through the trees, humming to herself, completely at ease. The forest was unlike any Arya had seen. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than houses, their canopy so dense that the ground below was in perpetual twilight. Vines hung everywhere, thick as a man's arm, covered in flowers that glowed with a faint bioluminescence. The air was heavy with moisture and life, every breath tasting of growing things. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes before the forest opened into a clearing. And in that clearing was a village, not crude huts or temporary shelters, but real buildings, constructed from wood and stone and woven plant material, decorated with carvings and paintings in styles that reminded Arya of the volcanic islands, but different, more organic, more alive. There were perhaps 50 structures arranged in a rough circle around a central plaza where a fire burned despite the heat of the day. People emerged from the buildings, dozens of them, all with the same dark honey skin and black hair as the child. They wore similar clothes, simple and practical, and many of them had decorative markings on their skin, lines and patterns that might have been paint or tattoos or something else. They stared at Arya and her crew with the same curious but not hostile expression the child had shown. An older woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was perhaps 60, her hair streaked with grey, her face lined with age and wisdom. She wore a robe more elaborate than the others, decorated with shells and feathers and small carved stones. When she spoke, it was in the trade language, fluent and clear. Welcome, travellers from the East. It has been many generations since anyone came from across the water. We thought the grandmother words were dead. We thought we were alone. But here you are, speaking as our ancestors spoke, arriving as they said others would arrive when the time was right. I am Miri, speaker for this village. You are welcome here. Arya stepped forward and tried to remember the formal greeting Peter had taught her. I am Arya Stark, daughter of Eddard Stark, of Winterfell in Westeros. We come seeking knowledge and friendship. We bring no weapons of conquest, no desire for dominion. We wish only to learn and to share what we have learned. Miri's eyes widened slightly at the word Winterfell, and she spoke rapidly to the people behind her in a language Arya did not know. There was murmuring, gesturing, and what looked like excitement. Finally, Miri turned back to Arya with an expression of wonder. Winterfell, she said slowly, the place of eternal winter, the great hall of the Wolf Lords. You come from the land of legends, from the place the first people fled when the cold death came. We have stories of Winterfell, old stories, stories we thought were only myths. Arya felt something cold run down her spine. You have stories of Winterfell. Here? How? Come, Miri said, sit, share food with us, and I will tell you the story of how your people and mine are connected across the great water. It is a long story, but it is one you should hear. They sat in the plaza, the whole village gathering around them. Food was brought, strange fruits and roasted fish and flatbread that tasted of herbs Arya could not name. And as they ate, Miri told her story. She spoke of the long night, the great cold that had nearly ended all human life. She spoke of the darkness that had lasted a generation, the dead things that had walked and killed, the heroes who had fought them with fire and dragonglass and courage. It was the same story Arya had heard all her life, but different, seen from another angle, told by people who'd experienced it in a different way. According to Miri's people, when the long night came, humanity had not just fought. They had fled. Great migrations had occurred. People moving south and east and west, seeking warmth and safety from the cold death. Some had gone to what would become Westeros. Others had come here, to these western lands. And in the chaos and fear, the stories had fragmented. Each group had remembered the long night in their own way, had named the heroes in their own language, had preserved different pieces of the truth. But certain names had survived across the distances. Winterfell, the last hero, the Night's Watch, even the Stark name itself, though it had been twisted by time and translation into something that sounded different here, but was recognizably the same. "We thought you were all dead," Miri said quietly. "The Eastern Lands, Winterfell, the Wolf Lords. We thought the cold death had consumed you all. But here you are, alive, changed perhaps, but alive. It is a miracle, a gift from the Water Mothers." Arya sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was hearing. Her family, her home, her history, they were part of something larger than she had ever imagined. The Starks were not just the rulers of the North. They were survivors of a cataclysm that had reshaped the entire world. They were living proof that humanity had endured the worst darkness imaginable and lived to tell the tale. "Your people?" she said finally. "Do they remember the long night? Do they prepare for it to return?" Miri shook her head. "It was too long ago. 10,000 years, our stories say, though who knows if that is true. We remember it in our songs and our rituals. We remember the lessons it taught us. But we do not fear its return. The world is warm now, the cold death is gone. We have new challenges, new dangers, but not that one. Never that one again." "I hope you are right," Arya said, thinking of the Night King, of the dead rising at Winterfell, of how close they had come to losing everything. The long night had returned, in a sense, but it had been defeated. Maybe Miri was right. Maybe it was truly over this time. They spent 3 days in Miri's village, learning and trading and sharing stories. Arya taught them about Westeros, about the Seven Kingdoms, and the wars that had torn them apart, and the fragile peace that held now. They taught her about their land, about the cities that lay inland, about the other peoples who lived along this coast, each with their own languages and customs and stories that echoed Westerosi myths in strange and wonderful ways. On the third night, Arya sat alone by the fire in the plaza, writing in the journal she had been keeping since they left the volcanic islands. She had filled dozens of pages with observations and maps and thoughts, creating a record of everything they had seen and learned. It was not the work of a warrior or an assassin. It was the work of a scholar, an explorer, a storyteller, and it felt right in a way that killing never had. Miri joined her, settling onto a log with the easy grace of someone who had spent a lifetime moving with the rhythms of this place. "You will leave soon," she said. It was not a question. "Tomorrow," Arya confirmed. "The crew is restless. They want to see more of the coast, to explore further before deciding whether to return to Westeros or establish a more permanent presence here." "And you?" Miri asked. "What do you want?" Arya was silent for a long moment, watching the flames dance. "I want to keep moving," she said finally. "I want to see what else is out here. I want to collect stories the way you collect people who speak the grandmother words. I want to be a bridge between your world and mine, bringing knowledge back and forth, helping people understand that we are not as separate as we think." "That is a noble goal," Miri said, "but it is also a lonely one. Bridges stand between two places and belong fully to neither." "I know," Arya said, "but I have been many things in my life. A lady, a water dancer, a servant, an assassin. I have been no one and someone and everything in between. Maybe being a bridge is just another way of saying I am still searching for where I fit. And maybe that is okay. Maybe some people are meant to search forever." Miri smiled. "My people have a saying, 'The river does not ask where it is going. It simply flows.' Perhaps you are, like a river, Arya Stark, always moving, always changing, always bringing life to the places you touch." "I like that," Arya said, "though I think I am more like a wolf. Wolves do not stay in one place either. They follow the hunt, they follow the pack. And when the pack is gone, they make a new one or walk alone." "Then walk alone with purpose," Miri said, "and know that you will always have a place here if you need one. You and all who sail with you. This I swear as speaker for my people." They left the next morning, the entire village coming down to the beach to see them off. Miri gave Arya a gift, a carved wooden wolf small enough to fit in her palm, its surface worn smooth by handling. "So you remember," she said, "who you are, where you come from, and that you're not the only one who remembers." Arya tucked the carving into her pouch beside the coin she had carried since Braavos and the stone from the volcanic islands. She was collecting talismans now, she realized. Physical. Reminders of all the places she had been, all the people she had met. Maybe that was how you built an identity when you belonged nowhere. You carried pieces of everywhere with you. The ship sailed north along the coast for 2 more months, stopping at 5 more settlements, each one different from the last. They met fisherfolk who lived on boats and only came ashore to trade. They met city dwellers who had built structures of stone and metal that rivaled anything in King's Landing. They met wanderers like themselves, people who moved from place to place following the seasons or the migrations of animals, or simply following their own restless hearts. And everywhere they went, Arya gathered stories. She learned languages, traded knowledge, made maps that would have been worth fortunes to the right people in Westeros. And slowly, gradually, she began to understand what she had become. She was not Arya Stark of Winterfell anymore, not entirely. That girl had died somewhere between the House of Black and White and the twins, but she was not no one either. That identity had never truly fit, had always been a tool rather than a truth. She was something new, something that had no name in any language she knew. An explorer, yes. A storyteller, yes. But more than that. She was someone who existed in the spaces between things, between cultures, between identities, between the known and the unknown, and she was content with that. The final vote came on a clear morning 3 months after they had first sighted the western continent. Davith called the crew together and asked the question they had been asking every week since leaving the volcanic islands. Continue west or turn for home? The vote was close. Closer than it had ever been. Many of the crew wanted to return to Westeros, to share what they had learned, to see their families, to rest. But enough wanted to continue, wanted to see what lay further north, or further south, or further inland. The vote to continue won by a single hand. Mal stood and faced the crew. "I am done," he said flatly. "I voted to go back, and we aren't going back, so I am staying here." Miri's people said they would welcome anyone who wanted to remain. I am taking them up on that offer. Anyone else who wants to stay is welcome to join me. 3 others stood with him, the 2 Braavosi brothers and a young Northman named Jack. 4 people choosing to stay, to make new lives in this new land, rather than continue into the unknown. Arya felt a pang of loss, but also respect. They were making their own choices, following their own paths. That was what exploration meant. Not everyone had to go the same direction. "May you find peace here," she said to them, "and may your children's children remember that you were among the first to bridge the gap between our worlds." The ship sailed on, smaller now, but no less determined, and Arya stood at the bow, her journal in her hands, her eyes on the horizon. There was more to see, more to learn, more to become. The maps were filling in, the blank spaces shrinking, but the unknown was infinite. There would always be another horizon, another mystery, another story waiting to be gathered. She thought of Sansa and Jon and Winterfell, and she knew she would return someday. But not yet. Not until she had seen enough to understand how small and how large the world truly was. Not until she could bring back knowledge that would change how people saw themselves and each other. She was Arya Stark. She was a wolf. She was a bridge. She was a river. She was no one and everyone and everything in between. And she was exactly where she needed to be. The ship sailed on, and the unknown welcomed her with open arms, and she smiled into the wind and knew that this was just the beginning. There were more stories to gather, more places to see, more ways to redefine what it meant to be a Stark when you were 1,000 miles from home. She was the wolf beyond the maps, and the maps would never contain her again. The journey continued, the stories accumulated, and Arya Stark, daughter of Winterfell, explorer of the western lands, collector of tales and truths, sailed on into the forever unknown, chasing horizons that retreated with every mile, content in the knowledge that she was finally, truly free.